I'm Tony from Maine Ghost Hunters, and I'm standing here in Augusta, Maine, just outside the general location of the one and only hanging that was carried out here in Kennebec County. The case involved a man named Joseph J. Sager, who was accused of murdering his wife by poisoning. If you'd like to learn more about the Joseph J. Sager case and whether or not this place is haunted, keep watching and Kat will fill you in on all the details.
January 2nd, 1835 was the date of the last state-sanctioned execution in Kennebec County, Maine, and it took place right across the street from where I'm standing in this whole bank lot. It's the whole corner over here. This is where the gallows was constructed for a man named Joseph J. Sager. Now, Joseph J. Sager was an unhappily married man who some say decided to remedy that situation by poisoning his wife. His wife's name was Phoebe Sager. Joseph and Phoebe Sager lived in Gardner, Maine at the time of the incident with their domestic servant, Anne Rafter. Now, Joseph and Phoebe were not a family of means. They were blue-collar workers. Joseph was a leather worker. He made saddles for horses and harnesses for horses. And he also worked in like shops, like he would take shop jobs, just work in other people's shops. So he was pretty marketable wherever he went. Phoebe was a lot older than Joseph. She was sick all the time, and she drank a lot, to the point where like everybody knew that she was sick all the time and she drank a lot. She was a dressmaker and a milliner. And Joseph made it known to family, friends, and acquaintances, anybody who would give him the time of day, that he was just really unhappy in this marriage and that he was looking forward to the day Phoebe passes. He would tell people this all the time, that he was really looking forward to the day where Phoebe was no longer around so that he could go off and find somebody else to marry. So the morning of October 5th, 1834, Joseph and Phoebe wake up, and Phoebe announces that she doesn't feel good again this morning. And so Joseph said, "Hey, I have this idea for a drink that I think will help you feel better." So he went out to the kitchen and he got this empty carafe. He filled it with wine and he cracked an egg. He dropped the egg in it, and he just put a whole bunch of white sugar in there, and he shook that up really, really well. And he gave it to her and he told her, "Drink this, it'll help you feel better." So she drank some of it, and after a while she said she didn't feel better. And he said, "Oh, you're going to want to drink all of it. It's going to help you feel better. You got to drink all of it." So she drank some more, but she didn't drink all of it, and she started to feel sicker. And he noticed that she didn't drink all of it again, so he told her, "Phoebe, you got to drink all of it, the goodness being all at the bottom." So she drank some more, but she didn't drink all of it, and then she started vomiting. And the vomiting started to get worse over time. Actually, over a quick period of time, it just started like getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where Joseph went into the city and he got a physician, and he brought the physician back to the house to help Phoebe deal with whatever her sickness was. Now, this sickness was unlike any other sickness she had experienced before, so it was really concerning to the both of them. And then when the physician saw what was happening, well, it was concerning to him too, so he stayed for the whole day. Now, Phoebe's vomiting escalated very quickly, and within a few hours, she was vomiting bloody vomit, and also her intestinal cramping was it was excruciating. This woman was in excruciating pain. And at one point, she told the doctor she thought maybe Joseph had poisoned her with the drink that he made her. So the doctor had his eye on this carafe that was left over, and when she died, of course, he wanted to do something with that. So what he did was, he had her body sent off to the medical examiner's office and requested that the contents of her stomach be sent off to a Professor Cleveland at the Bowdoin Medical College in Brunswick. Now, Professor Cleveland was highly qualified to be analyzing the contents of her stomach. He was qualified, so there's no doubt about this. What the doctor also did was, before he left, he had his eye on that carafe and all this white sediment that was at the bottom of it. He was very curious as to what that was and wondered if maybe Phoebe was onto something, because this was a pretty horrendous way to die. So he grabbed this carafe, and also he happened to notice that beside the carafe was a cream container that also had a white residue at the bottom of it. So he grabbed that also. He took both of them to Brunswick to be analyzed by this Professor Cleveland at Bowdoin Medical College. It did not take long long for the results to come back that arsenic was found in all three. So Joseph was arrested very immediately after that and charged with the murder of his wife. He was arrested, arraigned, charged with the murder. He pled not guilty, but like I said, they didn't have a lot of money in their family, so he was put in jail and kept in jail for the duration of the waiting time until the start of his first court date. Now, let me give you a timeline of how this went. Phoebe died on October 5th. 18 days later, on October 23rd, was the start of Joseph J. Sager's murder trial. A murder trial where he was responsible to prove his innocence to save his life, because otherwise, if he was found guilty, he would be hung. Okay, so he only had 18 days to do this, and he didn't have 2 nickels to rub together to pay for his own defense. Okay, so the trial date arrives, October 23rd arrives, and the trial starts. And the trial takes place not in a courthouse, it takes place at the Old South Church. I'll explain a little bit about what that scene looked like. I will tell you that it was a madhouse. Everybody and their brother wanted to see this trial. This court case was a sensation. It was the O.J. Simpson case of its time. It was literally a sensation. Every newspaper journalist from every newspaper in the state tried to be here for this trial. This trial headlined in newspapers across Maine and was even printed in papers across the country. So the courthouse was the Old South Church at the time, so you can imagine what a church might look like, how open that is and how much seating there is for spectators and stuff. All the spectator seating was full. There were people standing around where they were, because all the seats were taken, so there were people standing around. It was the whole viewing area was full of people. There was a balcony. The balcony was the same situation. People took up all the seats and were standing in all the open spots. There were journalists all crawling all through the town, investigating on their own. They were doing investigations on their own. They were trying to put the pieces together on their own. They were trying to build their own stories. So they were also in the courthouse during the trial. Now, there were 2 prosecutors. There were 2 judges, because at this time in Maine history, you had to have, if a man's life was on the line, or say someone was going to hang for what they had done, if they were found guilty, you had to have 2 judges overseeing that whole trial. So there were 2 judges, Chief Justice Weston and Associate Justice Paris. And on the defense side, Joseph had 3 defense attorneys, and one of them was a sitting U.S. senator. This was a very big deal. And let me tell you, every single one of these people that was involved in the handling of this case, they had political aspirations. And this case really was something that they had in consideration when they were thinking about their political aspirations. Okay, so just cut to the chase. He was found guilty. Now, we know this because he was hung, but what he looked like when the jury was coming back to deliver that guilty verdict, I want you to understand what he looked like. So there were so many journalists that wrote about this because they were all in attendance at the time that the guilty verdict was given to him. Joseph was standing at this table that was in front of him, and he was trying to hold himself up. His hands were shaking, and they were trying to hold him up. His body was shaking. He was hyperventilating. He was sweating. At certain points, he was crying. This is before the guilty verdict came through. Okay, so when they said he was guilty, he actually physically collapsed. He fell to the floor. His defense attorneys had to help him stand again. I had to help him up to his chair, actually. Judge Weston sentenced him to hang on January 2nd, 1835, which is not that far. His wife died October. He had November, December, and into January, so like right around a little over 3 months between the time that his wife died and the time that they hung him. Now, there are a few aspects of the case that I think are vital for you to know. The first is, I'm just going to tell you this first part, it does not paint Joseph in a positive light, and I want you to know this first because you have to understand how his community was viewing him and how the prosecution viewed him from the start, because this is the way he kind of viewed his marriage. Joseph was commuting from one city to another on a riverboat. This was a very common way to commute back then. you walked, you used a horse or a train, and a lot of people commuted by riverboat. And this is what he was doing. He was going from one city to another, and his friend worked on this riverboat. So on this one particular day, he's on this riverboat, he's talking to his friend, and he tells his friend, you know, Phoebe's going to be dead soon. And his friend's like, oh, sorry about that, you know, like, really? And he said, yeah, you know, she's been really sick. And of course, Joseph he never hid the fact that he wanted to be out of this marriage with Phoebe, and he hoped that it would come from her death. But so his friend's like, oh, okay, well, that's too bad. And he noticed that Joseph was writing something on a piece of paper. So he said, well, what are you writing there? And Joseph said, oh, I'm writing a list of women's names, you know, women that I may want to marry after Phoebe dies. And he was like, yeah, she's going to be dead by spring, so I've got this list. The only thing is, I can't carry this list around with me. What if Phoebe finds it? So he's folding up the list, and he hands it to his friend, and he says, will you hold this for me, and I'll pick it up on the way back through. So his friend has this list. And then Phoebe dies in October 5th. So that's not the spring. And so Phoebe died like very shortly after this conversation. So this guy's kind of like, you can imagine how he wound up on the witness stand testifying for the prosecution and essentially against his friend Joseph. But here's a couple other things that you should know before we get to the actual hanging. The first is, I want to explain to you the socio-political climate in Maine at the time in the 1830s, especially 1834, 1835. But before I do that, I have to tell you about the climate in 1850, because social movements don't just happen like that. You have to grow into a social movement. In the 1850s, there was a thing called the Know Nothing Party here in Maine. It was in other places too, but in Maine, the Know Nothing Party was quite the force. You had the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and then you had this Know Nothing Party. Now, the Know Nothing Party was extremely bigoted, racist, xenophobic, every level of narrow-mindedness that you could think of, the Know Nothing Party members embraced. If you were not a straight, white, Protestant, Christian, natural-born Mainer, the Know Nothing Party had you in their sights. Like, these people had a certain philosophy that involved you being only those things. And if you weren't those things, if you were an immigrant, if you were a Catholic, in the 1850s, the Know Nothing Party was burning crosses on Catholics' lawns. You know, they were tarring and feathering Catholics. And let's not even talk about their hate and racism toward minorities such as black people. And so you have to just keep all this in mind. This was a full force in the 1850s, which means the foothold was definitely here in the 1830s. This doesn't just crop up overnight. This movement was fully in place in the 1830s. I'm telling you this because when Joseph's defense attorneys asked him, they said, okay, well, you didn't do it. You did not kill your wife. If you did not kill your wife, who else could have done this? Joseph's response was, it had to be the living domestic servant, Anne Rafter. Now, if we look at Anne Rafter, we see that Anne Rafter was a young, single female, Irish immigrant Catholic. I mean, she was the perfect target, okay? And so when Joseph's defense attorneys were like, okay, well, she lived with you and she's all these things, there's a possibility that she did this because she was the domestic servant. She did the cooking, the cleaning, she probably bought the food, prepared the food, and all that sort of thing. Now, this is what I want you to know about Anne Rafter. Within the 18 days that Joseph was in the jail, he has no influence over what's going on outside of the jail. He's being fed information. He doesn't feed information. He may give his defense attorneys the information that they're looking for, but he's not guiding the investigation of what's going on outside of that jailhouse. So they came to him and told him that there is a rumor running around. And the rumor is that Anne Rafter confessed to this murder, and she signed a confession. So his attorneys were in a mad hunt for this confession, and they could not find it anywhere, and they never found it. The next thing you should know about this case is the scenario in the courthouse and all through Augusta at the time with all these journalists that were around. 9 out of 10 of these journalists all wrote the same story. They wrote that Phoebe's body was sent to the medical examiner, the contents of her stomach were sent to Bowdoin Medical College, and that the physician picked up the carafe and the cream container, and he brought those to the Bowdoin Medical College also. But this one journalist, this 10th journalist, he wrote that Ann Rafter was the one who picked up the carafe and the cream container, and she was tasked with taking these to Bowdoin Medical College. So not only was she a suspect to the defense, because the defense said that their guy didn't do it, she's also in possession of the murder weapons, essentially, for a period of time, for a long period of time. If this is true, it was never able to be proven true because she was the prosecution's star witness, and they kept her pretty well locked down. Like, she told a story, and that is the story she told, and the story she told resulted in Joseph J. Sager being found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang. Now, there's one more facet of Ann Rafter's role in this whole mix that I think you should know about, and it came into the knowledge of the community after Joseph was hung, and that's that she never went to confession after the trial, not once. Back in the 1830s, this is a very huge deal, and people noticed. They took note in a way that it put her in a special light from that point forward. So January 2nd arrives, and Joseph honestly didn't believe he was going to be hung. I mean, he knew that there was a possibility that he could be hung, but his mother had told him that if he's innocent, she's going to do everything she can to make sure that he's not going to get hung. And he had every faith in the world that she was going to follow through with her promise and that she was going to save him from being hung. So she was working overtime. His defense attorneys, they filed an appeal based on the fact that they said that the state suppressed evidence that would exonerate their client, but the state denied that was the case and denied the appeal. His mother's trying to get the attention of people to try to save his life, but this isn't working. And so the day of the hanging arrives. Joseph's in his cell, and he's waiting for word from his mother that the day has been saved for him and that he's been spared, but this doesn't happen, and he realizes about maybe 2 to 3 hours before the hanging time actually happens, because they've built the gallows already. He knows that they've built the gallows. I think he's even seen them building part of the gallows at a certain point, so he knows this is happening. So he starts writing down his final words on a piece of paper, and he's just trying to just really write out everything that he's thinking, everything he wants said, and it's kind of like a rush job. He folds up the paper, he puts it in his pocket, and about an hour or a couple hours before he's to be brought out to be hung, his mother is in the courthouse, and the courthouse is right across the street from the bank. Now, she's in this courthouse because the governor is on the second floor of the courthouse. The governor's on the second floor. He's in a room in the courthouse that looks over the gallows over here. And he's surrounded by his aides, his council members, his advisors, and I mean the room was full of who's who in Augusta politics at that time. His mother arrives up on the second floor, runs to the door where the governor is. She can see him inside the room. There's all of his, all these people are all around him. They're kind of shielding him from anybody who's in the hall trying to get to him, and she's one of these people. She's pleading for her son's life. She's hollering to him. She's crying. She's, emotional. She's begging for him to give her just a moment of her time. And he gives her not even a glance. He doesn't even look at her. He doesn't even turn around to make eye contact with her. He gives her no respect whatsoever. A mother who's about to watch her son die, and he doesn't even have a moment to offer her. It was a pretty callous scene up there. Now, there's people all over the place, and I want to explain this scene to you so you can really grasp the concept of how many people were here. First of all, there were only 7 to 12 Augusta light infantrymen on scene. There weren't that many available to begin with, and they knew that they needed somebody to guard the governor and also to guard the gallows. So there were just about 7 to 12 of these men. That's it. It matters because this whole area was full of people. Of course, everybody wants to see the show, and that's the way they viewed it. It was like entertainment to them. Augusta at the time, in 1830, had a population of 3,980, according to the census. In 1840, it had slightly over 5,000 people. So let's just say there's 4,000 people living in Augusta in 1835, when Joseph J. Sager was hung. There were 4,000 people living in the city of Augusta, and standing in this small area was a crowd of 12,000 people. All demographics of people, men, women, children, elderly, sick, and it was January 2nd. This day was awful. It was a typical January day in Maine. It was sleeting in the morning. There was freezing rain throughout the day. It was snowing. It was very raw, blustery, windy, all kinds of, it was a terrible day to be outside, and there were 12,000 people standing out here, okay? So Joseph's mother realized that trying to talk to the governor is not going to work. So she left and came down and joined the crowd just so that she could see her son and her son could see her before his final moments. The sheriff went to his cell and gave him a warning ahead of time. And then when the time came, he and 2 deputies went to his cell. They opened his cell door. I think they expected something a little more dramatic from him, but he was very calm. He stood up. They asked him if he was ready to go, and he was. They draped the noose that they were going to hang him with over his right arm, and he carried that out with him from the courthouse to the gallows. The sea of people out here waiting for him to come out to the gallows was very raucous, very rowdy. These drunk men were getting belligerent with each other. They were pushing the crowd forward at certain points toward the gallows just to get closer, and they were pressing against the gallows. And like I said, those Augusta Light Infantrymen were standing up against the gallows, and it was crushing them. So they had to hide themselves under the gallows at one point. They finally pushed the crowd back, got a little bit more control, and somebody in the crowd hollered, "Fire! Fire!" and caused all kinds of people to panic. It was a mob. But they did lead Joseph out to the gallows. He arrived on the gallows. He's standing on the trapdoor. The sheriff asks Joseph, "Do you have anything to say?" And he does. He has some final words he wants to say. And he starts hollering out his final words over this sea of 12,000 people. Not everybody could hear him, of course. He's just trying to get out what he wants them to know, that he is innocent, that he's just pleading for his life, and it's like they're not complete sentences that are coming out of his mouth. He's clearly out of his mind. He's not being loud enough. They're all being loud, so like nobody's hearing him. It's just a really sad situation. And there's a reverend that's standing beside him, and the reverend puts his hand on his shoulder and asks him, "Would you like me to read your final words for you?" And Joseph said yes, and he said they're in my pocket. So he reached into his pocket. He reached the Reverend Benjamin Tappan reached into Joseph J. Sager's pocket, pulled out his final words, and read them as best he could. And he read them as best he could, but it was just gibberish. It was a bunch of sentences that it wasn't coherent. It was just a really sad thing. So he read these words out loud, then he folded up the piece of paper and gave it back to Joseph. And then he stepped in front of Joseph. Joseph's kind of standing here, and he said to the crowd of people, "Let Joseph J. Sager be an example of what not to do. Be good people to each other, and don't wind up like Joseph J. Sager here." It was really quite the speech for a guy who's about to be hung. But anyway, so the sheriff is like, "All right, so we've done the final words. Now it's time." So he took a black hood and he brought it over to Joseph and he put it over his head. And Joseph is really emotional. He's like super emotional. Then he takes the noose, and he puts it over his head, and he doesn't tighten it, but he makes it a little taut against his neck. And when he does that, as he's making it taut against Joseph's neck, Joseph says, "I'm innocent," and he kind of chokes up as the rope touches his neck, and he was a wreck. And the sheriff then clasped Joseph's hands into his own very humanely and said goodbye. And he starts to walk away, and Joseph says, his final words are, "But you're hanging an innocent man." And the sheriff responded with, "This is now between you and your God." And he walked off, and he walked down the stairs, and on his way down, he slashed the rope that was holding the trap door that Joseph was standing on, and Joseph descended very rapidly into a sickening thud. He just landed, the rope caught him, and he just twirled around. There was no movement whatsoever, so people who viewed this, they said that they thought he died instantly because there was like literally no movement. There was a doctor on scene. The doctor waited 20 minutes before declaring Joseph dead. And the moment he did that, Joseph's friends and family were right there. They cut him down immediately. They put his body onto the back of a horse wagon, and they raced him off to a building in Hollowell. Now, this is where things get really interesting. His friends and family, they had come into the knowledge of Galvanism, which is essentially it was derived from an Italian scientist who had done work reintroducing electricity into inanimate animals. His name was Galvani. Now, Galvani had put electric current into the spinal cords of dead frogs and noticed that their legs moved when doing so. So he figured there was some sort of reanimation going on, and Joseph's friends and family thought, hey, let's just electrocute him back to life. So that's what they did. They tried to electrocute him back to life. I mean, Frankenstein was all the rage, and it had come out in like 1816, somewhere around there, and so maybe they took some of their scientific knowledge from some fiction that they had read. So they were trying to do this. They tried it a few times, and it obviously didn't work because his neck was broken, and so they whisked him off to an undisclosed burial location. So they buried him in an undisclosed location so that his burial spot would not be bothered, and that burial spot remained a secret for decades. 50 years later, one of the local newspapers wrote an article about this very hanging right here and explained the ins and outs from start to finish, and then at the very end of the article made a declaration, announced to the whole state where he was actually buried. And his burial place is on Horseshoe Island in Cobbassacontee Pond in Winthrop, Maine. And that's where he remains interred today.
The question we get asked most often is this place haunted? The short answer is we don't know. We haven't collected any evidence to suggest that it is, but local legend insists the answer is yes. Joseph Sager claimed his innocence from the moment he was accused to the moment he dropped through the gallows trap door. The legend says that if you stand on this corner and ask out loud, "Joseph Sager, for what were you hung?" he will reply, "Nothing." If you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to like, subscribe, and share our Maine Ghost Hunters YouTube channel.